Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about the That 90s Show series that just premiered on Netflix on January 19th of this year. Before we get into that, I wanted to just quickly say thank you to everybody who watched my last video. My That 90s Show trailer reaction video got the most views, the most likes, and the most comments on any video that I've ever posted on my channel. I think right now it's at 1,200. And while that doesn't seem like a lot of, views compared to a lot of the things that you probably are subscribed to on the internet, it's a lot for me, and that video also garnered 11 new subscribers to my channel. Started making videos purely because I liked making videos and not for any other expectations that they might be successful or viewed by any more than like 20 people, and those would consist of my immediate family and friends that I pressured into watching and liking and subscribing. So the fact that there are like people out on the internet watching my content and commenting, even if you disagreed with what I had to say, I truly do appreciate it because it makes making content a lot more fun and exciting because there are people engaging with you and sharing their thoughts and opinions as well. If you like the video, if you left a comment, if you're new to my channel, thank you so much. It truly means a lot. It's very exciting, and I can't wait to introduce some of the new plans and ideas that I have for my channel in 2023. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and I really hope you guys continue to like and enjoy the content that I am putting out there. So like I said, today we're going to be talking about the That 90s Show series. Spoiler alert! Spoiler! Spoiler! If you have not seen That 70s Show or That 90s Show. But yeah, without further ado, let's get started. So, That 90s Show. I love being right. So in my trailer reaction video, if you haven't seen it, I'll link it somewhere up here. I made the prediction that That 90s Show would be entirely contingent on the success of this new cast of teenager characters in this series. I predicted that I personally wouldn't find it funny, that the old characters would be the best parts of the series, and that the new characters would kind of be the weaker links, but that there would be some interesting aspects and dynamics at play that could potentially lend itself well to potential to be better in the future. And after watching this show twice now, I have come to the conclusion that I was pretty much accurate. This show is very media. It's very in the middle for me. It's definitely not the worst show of all time, and it's not even by a long shot the worst reboot, spin-off, or sequel series of all time, but it also has a lot of flaws. I think a lot of the consensus online is very polarized with That 90s Show. There's a lot of people that just hate it and everything that it stands for, and that just absolutely despise its very existence and hate every aspect of the series. And there are a lot of people that are like, you cannot say anything negative about this show because it is so sacred and perfect to them that they just will go for the fucking jugular if you comment anything negative or critical of this series. I kind of land somewhere in the middle. I think there was a lot of things that the show needs to improve on in order to become better in the second season. I mean, it's not uncommon for shows to kind of struggle to find its footing in the first season, That 70s Show included. So there's a lot of things that I can kind of forgive or hope that things will get better in the second season, but there is a lot of potential. And I think that there are a lot of moments where I get like excited, or I'm like, oh, that's kind of an interesting idea. I hope we explore that further in the seasons to come. But there's a lot of rough patches and a lot of things that I think the show writers really need to sit down and resolve. The show definitely got better as it went along. I think initially it's really struggled to find its footing and establish itself, but again, that's not uncommon for first seasons of television shows. This is not unique to That 90s Show. It's not necessarily a specific flaw for this series, but it does kind of make it difficult to get into as you go along. If I hadn't made this video, I probably would have stopped after a couple episodes because it wasn't really that engaging. Kitty and Red by far were my favorite parts of the consistent parts of the series. They seamlessly went back into their roles as I predicted for my trailer reaction video, which I don't think was a very big leap of faith for anyone to believe. They are fantastic. I think that they're a little bit more simplified than they were in the original series. I think they kind of in some ways were reduced down to a lot of their taglines and classic things that they said and did, but that's to be expected because we're trying to like make people feel familiar and comfortable with where we are in this new series, so that's definitely fine. The new characters, I think by far were the weakest contribution to this series, which is really a bummer because, like I said in my trailer reaction video, the success of this series hinges upon the new cast of teenage characters working well together. I think individually, most of their performances were serviceable and fine, and I know a lot of these characters, they're played by actors who are a lot younger than the original cast in That 70s Show, and I think they did a fine job, but there just wasn't a lot of acting chemistry between the characters. But what I think one of the biggest problems of this show, and I think something that they really need to work on on with season 2 in order to get it to work is the dynamic between the nostalgia, the old aspects of that 70s show interacting with the new aspects of that 90s show. As much as I was excited to see old characters, old references to things, nostalgic aspects and Easter eggs to that 70s show in this series, I think a lot of times though we're at odds with what was going on with the new characters and what the things that we're supposed to be focusing on. It's almost like the show was written around the cameo performances and the guest star spots and all of the other references that the show could possibly make to that 70s show, rather than taking those old elements and incorporating into a plot and having it all make sense and work together. And it became distracting at a certain point. As a result, that hyperfixation on including all that 70s show references made it so we didn't really get to focus on or learn about or develop these new characters that are supposed to be the focal point of the series. I also don't know where else to mention this, but I think it's probably just appropriate here. The studio audience laugh track. Holy shit. I don't know if everyone just did shots in the studio audience before they filmed any parts of the season, but the laugh track was abrasively loud. Anytime anybody did anything, the audience just went apeshit, especially if it had to do with something that was from the original series. And I mean, I get it. I would be excited and screaming and like clapping like this if I were in the studio audience as well, but it just was like so abrasive and loud and distracting. It was just kind of like, it was a lot. As a concept, I think the studio audience laugh track is a little bit strange, and I know it's very prevalent in sitcoms, but it just always felt to me like the show is prompting you as an audience at home of when to laugh and what to feel, and that always feels a little bit inorganic to me. And I mean, maybe these people really did find every aspect of the show hilarious, but based on my interpretation of the humor in this series, I feel like that has to be impossible. So either they were drunk or maybe it was like edited in to make you really feel hyped about this series. Basically, the concept of that 90s show is not very different from that 70s show. It's a story about teenagers hanging out in one of the parents' basements, making memories and killing time, and it exists in a time period that's different than, you know, when the show is actually being filmed. And I don't actually mind the fact that it's basically the same concept. I actually quite like that, and I think it was a smart choice because the concept of teenagers fucking around with each other and hanging out and just trying to like figure shit out as teenagers, kind of a timeless story. It's not something that's specific to the 70s and are specific to the characters from that 70s show. So you can kind of pick that concept up and insert it in with different characters in different situations, and it's flexible enough to allow a lot of different character dynamics to take place. There's something kind of funny about seeing the next generation of kids doing the same things that their parents are doing. This show does add a little bit of a different twist to the story from that 70s show. Leia, for example, is not fully integrated into the friend group by the time we meet her in the first episode like Eric was with that 70s show. She's kind of trying to navigate making friends and kind of inserting herself into this friend group, which adds a different twist to the situation. And like I mentioned in my trailer reaction video, this series has decided to have each season take place during a different summer year of the 90s. This was just the summer of 1995, and then next summer when we see Leia come back, presumably to Point Place again, it'll be the summer of 1996. I kind of mentioned this in my trailer reaction, and I still feel the same about it now. I do think in some ways that allows more flexibility with the plot to explore things that are not kids going to school and doing homework. It allows you to just kind of do more fun things that people would want to do in the summertime. But it also leaves with an inevitable challenge, I think, with the narration of the series. In this series, we leave off with Leia leaving Point Place and certain fates of character relationships kind of up in the air. We don't really know what's going to happen. And we're not going to really see that revisited again for another 9 months. So either everything is going to stay the exact same, which logically is not how life works, or things are going to happen in the interim and we're going to have to spend a lot of time catching the audience up about things that we didn't see in the 9 months between season 1 and season 2. Okay, so let's talk about the characters. Like I said in my trailer reaction video, this show will only work if the characters work. Really, at the end of the day, characters are the heart and soul of a sitcom kind of like this. The plot is just a function to feature the fun characters that we know and like, their interesting relationships and friendship dynamics. In this series, unfortunately, I think there were some bumps in the road with the character dynamics. It got a little better as the show went on, but it still wasn't quite working for me at the end of the day. I think one of the major problems is that the new cast of characters, while they did perform, serviceably and fine in their individual roles, they just don't really have the greatest acting chemistry with one another. They just kind of say things to each other and are supposed to accept that they're friends. There isn't that ever so important and tangible energy that exists between some of the best cast of television show characters, and I think that made some of the show a little bit less engaging to watch because I didn't really believe that they would actually be friends. The new characters are also very watered down and simplistic versions of the That 70s Show characters, and the show doesn't seem too interested in changing that much. You have the awkward protagonist, the rebellious best friend, the sassy one, the love interest, and the insufferable and incompatible couple that consist of the manipulative one and the dumb one. And sure, stereotypes exist for a reason, and that's what kind of makes that 70s show fun in the first place, but there's not a whole lot to these new characters other than these very overdone character tropes that we've seen before. There's no dimension to them, and it all just feels very flat and forced. Out of all the new characters, Leia definitely comes the closest to feeling like a compelling and engaging character. In fact, I think her character arc in this first season is pretty decent and has a lot of potential that I hope is further explored in season 2. Leia is immediately shown as a character who doesn't really know herself quite yet. She's engaged in all these activities at school back in Chicago and yet doesn't really seem satisfied with her life. When she shows up in Point Place and meets this new group of teenagers, she realizes she wants to have friends and figure out what she wants to do in her life and who she wants to be. It's also very clear right away that Leia doesn't know how to have friends and is constantly balancing on a line between being herself and being the version of herself that she thinks her new friends want to see. And I think that's all really compelling. It's a good story, especially for a young teenager. She also has a strained relationship with Eric, her father. So while I think all of that is really great, I think the show does struggle to write Leia in a way that gives her any other dimension other than just being the most awkward person on planet Earth. That's literally her only characteristic. The show constantly keeps bashing you over the head with the fact that Leia is awkward and not popular and doesn't know how to have friends, but they do it in so much and so often that it ends up making Leia come off like an unhinged fucking lunatic. I mean, this bitch is scaling the outside of a second-story house to listen to the music of a complete stranger in their bedroom and then just like watches her for no fucking reason. That is so unreasonably awkward and weird. She corners boys at the mall and forces them to kiss her and then shoves a bunch of Tic Tacs in her mouth. She's stealing people's addresses from a Blockbuster computer just so she could rent the movie Clerks. All that and about 1,000 other things, and it's all in the service of making it clear that this bitch is awkward, but there's no other dimension to her character beyond that. I think in season 2, if they end up toning Leia down a little bit, there could be a ton of potential with her character, and I would love to see it explored further, but they really need to add something to her that doesn't revert back to this one characteristic, because otherwise this bitch may just end up getting arrested. Okay. Here's the thing, I really don't like Gwen. For me, she's one of the least successful characters out of the new cast of teenagers. For one, I think her delivery and performance is not quite that convincing. She's always just smiling or smirking whenever she delivers her lines. And like a lot of the new people, Gwen just feels insanely one note and predictable to me. She's a riot girl, something that the writers want you to know about right off the bat because they write it and cut out middle fingers over her bed in the first episode. But beyond that, there's not a ton to Gwen. And it's weird because she's a character with a lot of connections to other characters. She's supposedly Leia's best friend, she's Nate's younger sister, she's Sherry's daughter, and she and Nikki have this weird beef with each other. But in every scenario, these dynamics don't really get fleshed out. They just feel like they're going through the motions. I mean, Leia climbs into Gwen's window like a fucking psychopath, and 5 seconds later, Gwen's like, oh yeah, this is my new friend now. For literally no reason whatsoever. She should be calling the cops. She and Nate have one spat about not getting along, and then they're just totally fine with each other 5 seconds later. Gwen and Nikki talk in one episode about not really getting along, but then they smoke a joint together, allegedly, and then 5 minutes later they're just cool. It's like the show just throws this stuff in for Gwen and doesn't actually explore these dynamics that could actually be interesting if they were given more time. And I know that sounds like I'm being really critical of the show, but that's really the entire point of the show, the fucking character dynamics and the relationships together. And with Gwen, I feel like they really just dropped the ball. I just have to say, I really like Ozzy. For me, he's the best performed character of the new cast, and I think the writers chose him to have the funniest lines in the series of the new teenagers. But like a lot of his counterparts, I think Ozzy suffers from being very narrowly defined as 1 or 2 characteristics, and that's basically it. I do like the storyline about him being a closeted gay teenager in a small town and having a 16-point plan to come out to his parents. There was a nice moment of Ozzy and Leia bonding over an actual experience, Leia lying to her family to not accidentally out Ozzy before he's ready to come out. It actually made their dynamic a little bit more believable than some of the other ones because we got to see it develop in real time over real experiences. I hope next season they give Ozzy more to do and flesh him out a little bit more as a character, like all of these characters, and I think they'll really have a big hit on their hands if they do. I have to say, Jay Kelso was an example of really good casting in this show. He looks exactly like Michael and Jackie, and there were moments that Jay's mannerisms looked identical to OG Kelso. That being said, as a character, Jay felt a little bit confusing to me. We're told that he's intelligent, enough so to get straight A's in school, but 80% of the time he acts like a total idiot. He's a player, but he's also very sensitive and caring to others. He's just kind of whatever the show wants him to be or the plot needs him to be in the moment, but not in a way where he feels multidimensional one-dimensional, but rather in a way that makes him feel inconsistent as a character. And as a result, I have a hard time connecting to Jay and making him feel like a person or caring about any of his relationships with the other characters. He's got this bromance with Nate that doesn't seem to be anything other than the two characters saying bro to each other. It feels incredibly forced and kind of annoying, and like they just want to give these characters something to do. I don't feel super invested in his relationship with Leia because I don't really know either of them as people, so it's hard to care whether they get together or break up. I think in season 2 the show needs to figure out a more clear direction for Jay's character. It actually would be cool to see him not just be a combination of his parents, but just have him have more characteristics of his own to make him more of an interesting and unexpected character for the series. Oh my god, these fucking two. This is a part of the series that was the most annoying to me. This relationship. Like I said earlier, Nikki and Nate are very clearly the insufferable and incompatible couple in this friend group, playing the Jackie and Kelso roles from that 70s show. The only problem with their relationship, however, is that it feels so unbelievably nonsensical and existing for no other reason to fit the quota of the previous series. Now, before you say anything, because I know you will, I know there are incompatible relationships in the world. I mean, hell, Jackie and Michael were insanely incompatible, but the show always did a great job of establishing very early on in the series what the dynamic was between these two that kept them coming back to each other, and you never really questioned the validity of their relationship. Jackie knows that she can control Michael and get whatever she wants from him, and Michael is too much of a pushover to break up with her or to not date other women that are interested in him. It's insanely toxic and unhealthy, but you get why they keep breaking up and getting back together so many times. They're that couple. We all know that couple. With Nikki and Nate, there's absolutely nothing of interest that keeps these two together or that would make you actually believe for a second that they would actually be in a relationship. They are so different. They have absolutely nothing in common. All they do is kiss, and when they're not kissing, Nate is just saying stupid things and Nikki corrects him while rolling her eyes. So once again, when things happen in the relationship, I don't care because it doesn't make any sense to begin with. Outside of the relationship, as characters, Nate and Nikki also suffer from a lack of dimension. I know a shockingly little amount of information about Nikki for being one of the 6 main characters in the series. She's someone who talks about loving school, and she's in this relationship with someone that is the exact opposite of her, and that's really all I know about her. I don't even know how old she is. I don't even know her last name. I don't know anything.
If you don't even know how I spell my name, what else do you not know about me?
I don't know what I don't know, Nick.
Nate is basically the Kelso character of being unreasonably dumb in every scenario, but there's not much more to him than that. The show at one point alludes to the fact that Nate's dad isn't around and that he doesn't even know Nate well enough to know his shirt size, which would be an interesting tidbit about him to explore, but it's kind of, again, mentioned in passing and then totally abandoned for the rest of the series. Doesn't really seem to have that much of an impact on Nate as a person other than in that one moment. I don't think it was a bad idea either to have Nate and Nikki be shown to having different goals in life and both of them separately realizing deep down that they're inherently incompatible with each other. But because I don't really buy into their relationship in the first place, that dynamic also felt very flat to me. As far as the old characters go, I was honestly really amazing to see the actors very clearly loving and getting a chance to get back into their old reprised roles in this series. Everyone just did an amazing job bringing back the characters and bringing them back to life, and it felt kind of surreal to see them on my screen again. Kitty and Red were really fun. I think they were having a fucking blast taking on these roles again, and it was fun to see them as grandparents as opposed to parents. It would be cool to see them bonding with Leia more or having more of a specific relationship with her other than just liking her as a granddaughter, but there's only so much time in the series, so maybe that was just an opportunity that we're going to save for season 2. Now let's talk about nostalgia. On the one hand, there were a lot of 90s references like I predicted, but at times it didn't always feel like I was in the 90s. I don't know if it was maybe the cast, and I've seen people kind of make this observation online as well. The show felt very weirdly like it took place in the present because the characters felt very like Gen Z-ish. And I don't really know what to pin that on other than just maybe the acting delivery and the performances, but it sometimes took me out a little bit and I forgot that we were in the 90s. I do think there was a lot of heavy hand with the 90s references to things, but you know, that was also something that was very prevalent in season 1 of that 70s show. We have to establish where we are and the decade that we're in and what's going on and really get that nostalgia work. I think in season 2 it'll probably be a little bit more toned down, so I wasn't really that distracted by it. It was just a lot, but I don't necessarily think that was a bad thing. I do actually like the credits at the beginning of the series where, you know, in that 70s show we were in the car driving around in the Vista Cruiser, and then in that 90s show we have a VHS tape and we're going around looking at all the characters. I really like that. I thought that was a fun twist in the same spirit of that 70s show's intro, but making it its own for the 90s. The song was something, but it was a 90s twist to the Cheap Trick original, so I think that was appropriate. This show also had like an unbelievable obsession with Plaid, which again is not a criticism, but it's just like something I noticed. And I know that Plaid was a huge thing in the 1990s, but Plaid was just like having a moment in this show. It was fucking everywhere. And I love Plaid, don't get me wrong, but it was a lot. It was a lot of Plaid. I'm not totally heartless, right? Nostalgia can be great. It reminds me of times when I didn't have crippling student debt and dark circles under my eyes. It's reminding us of a simpler time. Jesus Christ, I sound like Don Draper in Mad Men.
Nostalgia. It's delicate, but potent.
Anyway, nostalgia can be great in a show as long as it doesn't become the entire reason the show exists. It has to enhance, or at least not get in the way. Now, I talked a few minutes ago about the show's nostalgia for the 1990s, but this show's nostalgia is twofold. You have the 90s references nostalgia, and you have the That 70s Show nostalgia. And the unbelievable levels of nostalgia that this show has for its predecessor works toward detriment of this series. So you may be thinking to yourself, Megan, you hypocritical bitch, you said 5 minutes ago that the best parts of the series were the old characters being on screen. How can nostalgia for That 70s Show be a bad thing? Well, okay, shut up. Let me explain, okay? Yes, the moments from the old cast coming back to reprise their roles were, in my opinion, easily the funniest moments of the series, and I think a lot of the reason why people even tuned into the show in the first place. Is it a fair comparison? Probably not, because we know these people, and seeing them coming in and having a blast playing these iconic roles again is almost bound to be the highlight of the show no matter what happens. And it's not that I have a problem with seeing these characters again or having these references to the original series. It's more that I think the show is so painfully aware of the fact that people wanted to see their old favorite characters that they just kind of went overboard with the references, really overboard. And at the end of the day, the references to the old show didn't really work well with the context and the reality of the new characters or the new storyline, and they always just kind of felt at odds with each other. I think the best way I can describe the problem is by comparing this series to two of my personal favorite spin-off shows. Let's for a moment forget the fact that an article came out a few days ago confirming that Frasier was in the works for a spin-off of the show. For the purposes of this video, let's just forget that, okay? Okay, cool. Frasier is one of the most successful sitcoms of all time, but it's not always really easy for me to remember that it's also a spin-off of Cheers. And one of the reasons for that is Frasier, as a series, actually does quite a lot to distance itself from its predecessor. Frasier Crane is a character from Cheers, and the show respects the continuity of his character in that previous show, but we follow Frasier in a different city, in a different career, surrounded by different characters, and the show as a whole has an entirely different vibe from what came before. Yes, there are references here and there to the other characters, and in fact, some make guest appearances, most notably Lilith and Frederick, but they're almost never done in a way that purely just shines a spotlight on the people you know. It's always done to further the story in a fun and exciting way, and tries to build something new in the continued story. So, Cobra Kai is not very shy at all about including references to its prior source material, but even with all of those references and returning characters and other elements of Karate Kid revisited in this series, Cobra Kai still works so well for me because all of the things are incorporated in a way into this new show that elevate the series rather than bog it down. The returning characters don't just drop in for a cheap callback most of the time. They're included either as main characters or reoccurring characters, or at least to move the plot along in a more productive and thoughtful way. In fact, Cobra Kai kind of goes above and beyond and takes these old characters and enhances and develops them from what you thought you previously knew about them, which adds a lot of additional weight and importance to their involvement in this new series, all while seamlessly integrating them with these new characters that don't take away from their storylines as well. That 90s show doesn't really do either of these things, but I think the show thinks that it's doing both. It wants to present these new characters as the core of the series, but when we keep having to revert back to guest character appearances that exist for no other reason than to drop exposition bombs or say a funny line or two and then leave, and it takes up a lot of time and energy in the story, time that would be able to be used, getting to know these new people. Even Kitty and Red feel very detached from these new group of teenagers, especially their granddaughter Leia. Like they're supposed to be connective threads between the old and new characters, and we don't see really anything interesting in terms of the relationship or scenes explored with them and Leia. They just kind of scold Leia for doing something she wasn't supposed to do, but then they forgive her 3 seconds later. And even when it's not the characters coming back for offhand guest spots, like I said before, the characterization of of these new teenagers feels very much like lifeless and watered down versions of what came before, while following very similar storylines that feel very confined by the dynamics that preceded it, without putting in effort to make it new or interesting. If the show wants to succeed in season 2, because as I'm filming this part, I just got a notice on my phone that that 90s show was renewed for a second season, I think it needs to make a choice of either laying off on the references to that 70s show that don't really do anything any more than wink and nod at the audiences, or just go all in and fully integrate these two worlds better into one story.
Nostalgia literally means the pain from an old wound. It's a twinge in your heart, far more powerful than memory alone. This device isn't a spaceship. It's a time machine. It goes backwards, forwards. It takes us to a place where we ache to go again. It's not called the wheel. It's called the carousel. It lets us travel the way a child travels. Round and around, and back home again. To a place where we know we are loved.
Do I think that 90s show is a successful spin-off of that 70s show? It's, again, like I said, it's medium. That is the best way that I can describe this show. It is not the worst thing in the world, and a lot of people are calling it that purely from the fact that it exists, and I don't necessarily think that's fair. But it is also not God's gift to humanity like a lot of the That 70s Show super fans are claiming it to be. For me personally, I just didn't find the show that funny. Like I said, I think if I wasn't making a video about this, I probably would have turned it off after episode 3 or 4. There were some moments that made me laugh. It was kind of like cringy to me, and that's my personal opinion. I know a lot of people thought it was funny, and that's totally fine, and that's great. Humor is a matter of opinion and subjective interpretation, so it's really just, it's kind of fluff. The show is a little bit like fluffy, and I know that 70s show is kind of fluffy too, but even that felt more substantial and grounded in some sort of reality and relatability, whereas this show feels like it's just existing to reference this previous show that we all like without really treading off to be its own thing. Anyways, guys, thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe, and let me know down in the comments what you think of that 90s show. Did you like it? Did you think it was funny? Are you excited for season 2? Are you never going to watch it again? Are you probably going to forget that it existed after a month or 2 of people not talking about it anymore? If you're new to my channel, thank you so much again for subscribing and for watching, and I hope to see you guys again in the future. So until then, I'm going to go pay attention to my cat, because otherwise she's going to murder me in my sleep. So bye-bye.